Good afternoon. Welcome to our BPM Online user group. I am your host, Janine Pontarelli. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Technology Advisors. And our presenter today is Tim. Many of you who work with BPM already know Tim. Tim Casey is our BPM Online practice lead, and he's going to take us through our topic today on using lookups. Before we begin, though, I realize several of you may be unfamiliar with this platform, so I just want to take a second here to acclimate you. You will see you have some windows on your screen. At the bottom, you have something that is called widgets. Those are little clickable areas. The Q&A, if you have a question at any point during this presentation, go ahead and enter it in there, and we will get to it as quickly as we can. Your media player will help control the volume. The window, actually any of the windows, but the window for the slides, if you really want to zoom in on something or you're not able to see what's being shown on the screen, you can expand that and make it as big as you like. There's also, in those widgets at the bottom there, you'll see going right to left, at the very right, there's a green widget with a little piece of paper on it. That's a resource list. So there's two things in there I just want to point out to you that you can access at any point throughout the presentation. One is the registration link for our next user group, which I'll remind you again at the end of the presentation. But that will be on creating custom details in BPM Online, and that will be in September. We'll be doing these every 2 months going forward. So you can always check on our website on the home page at the bottom if you're interested in seeing when the next one's coming up or what the topic's going to be. Otherwise, I would recommend, if you're not already on our events list, getting on that, and we'll make sure to send you the invitations for those. And then right below that, there's a registration link for our webinar tomorrow with our friends at Acton, and that one is on demand generation myths for marketing. So it should be a good time and very insightful event, so I recommend you joining us for that as well. And then the next widget to the left, that little blue one with the person's head in it, that's where you can see a little information about Tim and I and some ways to contact us if you need to get a hold of us at any point. So I won't take up any more time. I will hand it off to Tim now to get started on this important topic.
All right. Thank you very much, Janine. Okay, so what we're going to be going over today is how to use business processes within BPM Online to control access rights via a custom lookup. We're actually going to walk through how to create this or set this up within the system designer today. So for the majority of the session, I will be sharing my screen. I do have a handful of slides that kind of highlight the steps we're going to be going through as well. We'll get to those in just a moment. Like Denise said, if you guys have any questions as we're going, just enter them in the little Q&A box there. And Denise will keep an eye on that and let me know about questions as they come up. So I've broken this down into about 5 main steps. So we're going to start by creating the necessary organizational roles within BPM Online System Designer, which we will use to administer these access rights. From there, I'm going to walk through creating a custom lookup object in the configuration page. So a little bit different than creating a lookup within Section Wizard, if that's something you've done before. This will allow us to have a little bit more control over the columns within the table. We will use Section Wizard to place a new field on the account page that we will be using to control the security. That'll be the new lookup object that we're going to build in configuration. I'll also walk us through how to populate that lookup list and link those lookup entries to the system administration objects or the organizational roles, which we're going to create in just a moment. And then from there, we'll dive into the process designer, and I'll actually build a process from scratch, a business process that will allow security to be controlled by the lookup we're going to build here today. We'll certainly have time for questions and answers at the end. And like I said, if you have any questions as we're going, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A box. So using lookups to control security is a very common request we get from a lot of our customers that are using BPM Online. I actually see a few people on the line right now that have a similar setup in their own BPM Online production environments. It is going to be a little bit different than what some of you have seen before. Just the way that the process is set up a little bit different than some of the folks I see on the call. And I do think you'll be able to modify similar processes to accomplish the same results. The end result's the same. It's still going to use a lookup to control that security, and I think it'll make more sense in just a moment. So like I said, this does fall outside of the typical object permission setups that we typically see in BPM Online. Since we are going to be using a business process and a custom lookup, there is no need for any sort of custom development. Once we do have everything set up, we are going to be able to control the security of an account record by using the new lookup field that we're going to add to the page via Section Wizard. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Okay. Just a moment, my slide doesn't look right. All right. We're going to start by setting up the necessary organizational roles. So I'm going to define some sales regions for this example. I'm going to use a very simplistic setup, and we're going to set up new organizational roles for the East, the West, and the Central division or regions within a fictional sales department. I'll walk us through that in just a moment. From there, we're going to create that custom lookup object. So we're going to place that directly into the custom package. This is actually done through the configuration page on the advanced settings, which are also launched through the System Designer. So these are going to be available only to system administrators. We're going to use the base lookup object to inherit the properties of the base lookup, and we're going to add an extra column that actually targets the system administration object lookup list. So let me go ahead and actually pull up my screen, and I'll walk you through these first two steps before coming back to the slides. Okay. So what I have here is just a generic demo instance that I generated on the BPM Online website. I'm going to be using this for example. It is filled with dummy data, excuse me. So I'm going to start by logging in, which is going to take me to the BPM Online main menu. And from here, I'm going to navigate to the System Designer page. Over here on the right, using my little gear icon. And I'm going to find Organizational Roles, which is listed under Users and Administration. We see that here. So like I mentioned, in my example, I'm going to control the security on an account record by using a lookup that's based on different sales regions. So I'm going to start by creating a handful of organizational roles under the sales department role that comes with the system. I'll do that by highlighting the sales department role, selecting new, and entering a new division. I keep this example fairly basic. So I'm going to start with an East region, a West region, and a Central region. And I am seeing some comments that it's a little hard to read, so I'm going to zoom in a bit. Hopefully that makes it a little easier to see for everybody. So I'll save the East region. It lets me know that I want to update my roles once I finish creating roles, which I will do. But first I'm going to create the rest of those regions. So once again, I'm going to highlight sales department. I'm going to do another new division. This time we'll add the Central region. Go ahead and save that. And then we'll do one more for the West region. If I wanted to assign my users to these roles as I was setting up the organizational roles, I could do so here using the users detail. I'm not going to bother in this example. Keep in mind you can do that directly from the role, or you can also assign organizational roles at the user creation screen as well. Okay, so now I have my 3 regional roles set up within the system, so I am going to update the roles And now I'll be able to find those within the system administration lookup, which we'll see in a few moments. My next step is to actually create the custom lookup object we will be using to control this security. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my system designer over here on the right-hand side, and then scroll down to the very bottom where we'll find our advanced settings under the admin area header. You do have to have pop-ups enabled. Okay. So those of you who are familiar with the advanced settings know this is where you find your object permissions as well as your configuration page. It's also where you would set up the change log and control your BPM Online license management. Give me just a second for this to load. Okay. So like I said, when you first pull up the advanced settings, it drops you off at the object permissions screen. So this is how you set up the out-of-the-box security model within BPM Online. That's not something we're going to need to change in this example. So instead, I'm going to jump straight to the configuration tab, and we'll see a list of all of the packages I have within my BPM Online environment. So if most of you are aware, if you're a system admin, in out-of-the-box BPM Online, all of your customizations are stored in the custom package. The custom package always sits at the bottom of your package hierarchy. It is a system package. It's actually the only system package that you're able to modify without creating a new package. So that is the package we're going to be using in this example. For those of you who have changed the packages you're using, keep in mind that is controlled through system settings. If you ever need to revert back to the custom package or change to a different package, like I said, in this example, we're going to stick with the custom package and place our new object directly into the custom package. So I'm going to start over here on the Schemas tab. I'm going to do a right click, which will allow me to add. And we're going to go ahead and add a new object. Bear with me for just a moment. Demo instances can be a little bit slow. Okay. So the object we're setting up is going to be the lookup object that we're actually using to control the security. So the very first step is going to be to set our inheritance. Anytime you create a new object in the configuration tab, you do need to inherit from something, and that's what's going to give us all of our system columns, things like the ID, the created by, the modified by. In this example, we're going to be inheriting from the base lookup object, so that's also going to provide us two columns to start with, the name and the description column, which will both be used as part of our lookup list. So to find the base lookup object, I can simply start typing here in the parent object field. Like I mentioned, I'm looking for the base lookup object. I'll confirm that is the parent object I want to use. And then if we expand our column list over here on the left-hand side, we'll see it did pull in those name and description columns as expected. The next step is going to be to provide this a name as well as a title. Keep in mind that the name is what it's going to be referred to in the database, so it always has to include your prefix. The default prefix for BPM Online is USR for users. This can also be changed in system settings. So I'm just going to call this the region lookup. There are no spaces allowed in the name. And the title is what it'll be displayed as on the screen, so you are allowed to use spaces and it does not require a prefix. I'll name it the region lookup there as well. It is going into our custom package, which is correct, so we do not need to change that. And you can see it is properly set to the base lookup parent object. The one thing we will need to do that's special about this lookup is we're going to need to add a custom column, and that's how we're going to link the entries within our lookup list to the proper organizational roles. So to add a new column to this lookup, I'm simply going to right-click where it says Columns, and I'm going to add a separate lookup column. So it wants a title and a name for this new column as well. Like I mentioned, I'm going to use this to link to organizational roles. So I'm just going to go ahead and label it organizational roles and store it as organizational roles in the database as well. Anytime you are creating a new lookup column, you need to define which list it's using. So since we're looking for our organizational roles, those are found in the system administration object lookup list, which we see here once I start typing. Okay. So this all looks correct. I'm going to go ahead and save this new object. I do that up here in the top left. You actually want to use this drop-down. So rather than selecting save, I'm actually going to select publish, which does a brief compile, and that allows this to actually be usable. And we'll need it in just a moment once we get to the section wizard. Okay. It does take a few moments, so I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my slides just for a minute, and we'll talk about the next steps we're going to go over. All right. So like I mentioned, now that we've actually created our new lookup object, we're going to have to create a new column for the account page that's going to store this lookup information. And we're going to need to point that new account column at the lookup object we've just created. We are going to use Section Wizard to accomplish this. That is the only way to alter your edit pages. For those of you who are familiar with Section Wizard, we're going to launch that using the View menu as part of the Account section. So let me jump back to my other screen. I'll see this is still loading, so bear with me for just a moment while it finishes publishing. In the meantime, I will check my questions and make sure we're not missing anything. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment, so give this just another 30 seconds or so, and we should be all set. Like I mentioned,
While
the
that's loading, I can,
No, go ahead, Denise.
I was just going to say I can use this as an opportunity to mention, we don't have a lot of details yet, but BPM is doing what they call their world tour, and they're going to be having it, one of their world tour events in Chicago this September. As we get details on that, we'll definitely let you guys know, but just wanted to give you a heads up. They're going to be talking about accelerating your business processes and a lot of details about using their system and things that you can do to enhance your digital transformation. So the topic is digital transformation acceleration. It's a half-day event, most likely September 13th, but again, we have no confirmation on that just yet. So stick with us and we'll get you the information.
All right, thank you, Janine. All right, so like I was saying, what causes the lengthier loading time is the compile I mentioned when you select publish rather than save. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're adding multiple objects to your custom package or any other package for that matter, it is not necessary to publish them all at once. You can use the save functionality and then compile all of your modified items on the left-hand side of that package window, which we would actually see here. Because BPM Online is a single session environment, although I can view other tabs I already have open, such as this configuration tab, it's not actually going to let me do anything until my object finishes saving, which of course is taking a bit longer than usual. Once it does finish saving that object, it would appear here in the custom package, listed here on the schemas tab, and it would be labeled properly as the region lookup, like we see here. Yeah, once this finishes, I'm going to jump back to the account section, and we'll actually place a new field on the account page which will reference this lookup object. We could alternatively create a replacing object for the account section within the configuration tab. There's really no need for that in this example, as it'll do that automatically through Section Wizard. Okay, so we can see that my object has finished publishing. I can go ahead and click OK, and then I can close this tab. It's no longer necessary. Here in my custom package, we do see that new object created, and it is placed in the custom package as expected. So like I said, let's go ahead and jump over to the account section. We're going to access Section Wizard by using the View menu, clicking Open Section Wizard. From here, we're going to go to the Page tab. Once this finishes loading, and that will allow us to modify the edit page for my account records. Those of you who have used Section Wizard know that this can also be a little slow. All right, so let's go ahead and click on that Page tab. Like I mentioned, we'll see the edit page for my account records. And we're going to go ahead and add a new column to the account section, which targets that new lookup object. Once we save this change, like I mentioned, it's going to actually create a replacing object for the account object for me, which will automatically be placed in the custom package. You can do that manually. I know some people prefer. I just think it's a little easier rather than wait for another set of publishing to just go ahead and create that through Section Wizard and add it to the layout all in one step. Bear with me for just a moment. Section Wizard always takes a little while. It's even slower on the demo instances, unfortunately. Okay. So here's my account page layout. I'm going to go ahead and add this new column onto my profile card over here on the left-hand side of the screen. So I'm simply going to drag out a new column, a new lookup column, down here at the bottom under the industry lookup. It's going to need a title and a name as well. So your title is going to be your label that you see on the screen. I'm going to simply call it region. And in the database, we'll refer to it as region as well with our standard prefix of USR. This is where we would control whether or not we want this to be a required field. I don't think that's necessary. You can also control the read-only settings here. And lastly, we have to point this to our new lookup object. So it defaults to select an existing lookup. So we should see our region lookup here in this list once I start typing, which we do. Some of you have probably added new lookups using Section Wizard. Keep in mind, if we did add the lookup in this manner, we would not have been able to add that extra column that targets the system administration object. That will be critical as part of our process. Okay, I'm also going to switch this to use the list lookup view rather than the pop-up window because it's a small list, or it will be a small list with only 3 entries. Let me go ahead and save that. We now see region listed under industry in the profile card. I'm going to go ahead and hit save one more time. And that's going to go ahead and publish these changes to my account page edit screen. Section Wizard can take a moment as well, so I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my slides, and I'll walk us through the next few steps we'll be seeing in just a moment. Okay. So once Section Wizard has finished publishing that change and that new column has been added to the screen, we're going to need to populate the lookup list we created. So to do that, we're going to go into the Lookup section, which is found through System Designer, of course. Once again, that's only available to system administrators. We're then going to populate the name column with the names of the different regions that we'll be using in that lookup list. And then we'll have to link those lookup entries to the proper system administration objects for this process to work correctly. If I go ahead and jump back to my screen, we'll see that Section Wizard has finished and it has applied those changes. Go ahead and hit OK. I don't need this tab anymore, and I'll jump here back to the account section. If I refresh my page, I should be able to see my new lookup. I may actually need to log out and log back in. Let me start with just a refresh and see if that lookup appears. Okay, so if I open up an account record, again, this is just dummy data that comes with the demo instance. We do see the region lookup has been created and placed under the industry lookup as part of an account edit page. There's nothing in this lookup right now, so if I click the little drop down, obviously nothing appears. The next step will be to actually populate that lookup. So let's go ahead and go back to the System Designer over here on the right-hand side. And we're going to find Lookups, which is listed under the System Setup header. And the very first thing we're going to need to do is register a new lookup based on the lookup object we created in the Configuration tab. I'm going to go ahead and click the New Lookup button. I'm going to start by selecting the object. So if you guys recall, we named it the region lookup. I'll also label it the region lookup to avoid any confusion. If I go ahead and save that. We see it appear over here in our lookup list. Let's go ahead and open that up. And this will allow us to define the entries as part of this lookup. So I'll go ahead and start with new. We're going to have the central region. We're going to have the east region. And we're going to have the west region. So the different columns we see here as part of our lookup, we obviously have the name and we obviously have the description. Remember, those come from the base lookup. Those are inherited from the base lookup object. So the name is what we actually see on the screen. The description is not displayed. And then we also have the custom column we added for organizational roles, which targets the system administration object. So this is actually a crucial step, is we have to link our lookup entries to the proper roles that are stored within that system administration object. Otherwise, the process we're going to design in just a moment will not function correctly. And this does work a little bit differently than some of the folks on the call as their security set up. So it's now actually being administered directly within the lookup list rather than as part of the process itself. So I can use the magnifying glass to see all of the different system administration objects, and I'm just going to look for my different roles that I've created in this list, or I can search for them up here at the top. So we have the central region. We'll want to find the east region. And lastly, the west region, of course. You may notice as I'm going through the system administration object, it also lets you specify individual users to be linked to your lookup entries. So you could potentially use a lookup to assign security to a user rather than a role. Okay, so now this is set up correctly. Let's go ahead and close. I'm going to go back to an account record just to make sure that lookup populated correctly. And then from there, we can go ahead and start designing our process. So let's look at the XT group account one more time. If I scroll down to region, We should now see our 3 entries do appear in the region lookup list. Go ahead and pick one, give the record, and check my access rights. We'll see that it has no effect currently, as the read, edit, and delete is still assigned to the all employees default role. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump back to the slides for just one more minute, and I'll run through what we're going to see here on the process design. Okay. So the different process elements we're going to be using as part of this business process, we're going to start with a signal start event. We're going to use that to automatically launch this business process, so it does not have to be launched manually. We'll be using the read data system action, so we're going to be reading the record that launches this process. In this case, it's going to be an account record. We're also going to use the read data system action to read that organizational role off of the lookup object that we created a little bit earlier. From there, we'll be using the change access rights system action to actually set those permissions. So like I mentioned, it's going to read the organizational role that's associated with that lookup entry. It's going to target that role when applying its new access rights. And then lastly, we'll close with the terminate end event, which will let the process know that it's finished running. I think my next slide has a picture of what the process is going to look like once we're finished. It's actually going to be pretty simple, but I'll actually build it from scratch here in just a second. So let me go ahead and pull my screen back up. And you'll see I'm on the System Designer page. And we're going to start in the process library, which of course is listed under the processes header. Okay, so when I click on process library, it's going to give me a list of all of my different business processes. I'm of course going to start with a new process. Okay. So anytime you start a new process, it'll automatically include the terminate event as well as a simple start. We're not going to be using simple start. We need to use the signal start, so I'm just going to delete everything it has by clicking these little X's, and we'll go ahead and start from scratch. The very first thing I'm going to do is give my process a name. You can see use a very generic name, business process 1 to start. So let's go ahead and call this auto set region security. Okay. So all my process elements are controlled over here on the left-hand side of the screen. Like I mentioned, we're going to be using the signal start event, which we see here listed under the start events header. Well, let's go ahead and start by dragging a signal start out onto the process window. So over here on the right-hand side, it's going to ask me what type of signal are we receiving. So we are going to receive an object signal, and the object we're looking for is the account object. So what kind of event is going to trigger this signal? Is it going to be a record being added to the system, a record being modified, or a record being deleted? We're going to set this up so it can be triggered off either a record being added or a record being modified. So we'll actually need 2 signal start events. But for this one, let's go ahead and set it to capture any records that are added to the system. Down here, we're looking for different filter conditions that the record needs to meet before it triggers this business process. So for this example, I'm just going to use a single condition that we want to read the region column on that account record. And we're just looking for that region field to be filled in. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this equal sign to it is filled in. And now any new account record that's added to the system that has the region field filled in will automatically trigger this business process. The last step is just to label this element. It makes it a little bit easier to refer back to later. So let's just go ahead and call this account created. So like I mentioned, we'll also want to capture or change the security anytime somebody modifies that lookup on an existing account. So we will need a second signal start event, which I'll place right below that. That'll also be looking at the account object. And this time we're going to be looking for records that are modified. You can see an additional field where it asks me which changes we are expecting. So I'm going to say we're looking for changes in any of the selected fields, which will of course be the region column. I can search for region, go ahead and select that, and then we'll apply those same filter conditions. So we don't want this process being used unless that region field is filled in. Okay. We'll go ahead and relabel this signal start event to account modified. Not required to relabel these. It just makes your process a little bit easier to read. Okay, so now we have two signal starts. So anytime an account is added to the system that has its region filled in, it'll automatically launch this process. And anytime an account record is modified, anytime someone makes a change to that region field, that'll also launch the same process. The next step is going to be using that read data element I mentioned earlier. So that's listed here under the system actions. So we're going to read some information from the account record that launched this process. I'm going to go ahead and drag that read data out onto the screen. And it's going to ask me, or let me fill in all of the settings, over here on the right-hand side. Okay. So we are going to read from the first record in the selection, and then it asks us which object we want to read data from. So we're, of course, going to be reading from the account object. And how does the system know which account we want to read information on? We define that by using the filters. So this is actually going to have two conditions. We're going to start by looking at the ID of the record, and we're actually going to compare that to a process parameter by using the compare with parameter functionality. That will allow us to read the ID of the record that triggered this process. So you can see here, by looking at the signal start event for an account creation, we can read the ID value of that specific record. We'll also need to add a second condition that looks for the ID, also using a parameter of any account that was modified. The last step here is to switch this to an OR statement. So now either will be targeted by this read data. So any account that's added to the system or any account that's modified, it'll know to read the ID value, or it'll know to read information from that specific account record. Down here at the bottom, we need to define what exactly we are reading from that record. Down here where it says read data from all columns, I'm going to switch that to read data from selected columns only. And I define those columns down here. So the only information we're going to need is the ID of the account record that we'll be modifying the access rights on. And we also need to know what region it was set to via that new lookup. So I go ahead and select those two columns, go ahead and hit save, and we see that displayed down here at the bottom. You could potentially use the read data from all columns and still have that same information. It's obviously not recommended. Anytime you're setting up a business process, you should try to be as specific as possible and only read the absolute minimum required information to save on the processing power. Okay. I can go ahead and relabel this read element as well. Just read account info. Okay. So let's go ahead and connect our signal starts to the read data element by simply dragging the arrows. And this is how the process will know which route it's supposed to take. You can also drag and drop these around to make everything look symmetrical. All right. Okay. Next step is we're going to need to read the system administration object out of that lookup list. So for that, we're also going to use a read data system action. I can go ahead and drag that out onto my screen. And we'll set this up somewhat similarly. So which object are we going to read data from? This time we're going to be reading directly from the region lookup. How are we going to filter these records? Once again, we're going to be looking for the specific record's ID. And that's going to be based off the process parameter. We're looking for the region that we read earlier off of that account record. So what information is this read data element going to read? We're only going to read off of selected columns, and we're really only interested in that organizational role that's defined as part of that lookup list. So we go ahead and select the organizational roles, and we see that populated down here at the bottom. Oops. Okay. Should also relabel this, that we're reading the region lookup. And then go ahead and connect the previous read data to our new read data element. All right. Next, we're going to need to actually change those access rights by using the change access rights system action. So I can go ahead and drag that out here onto my layout. Wants to know which object we're changing the access rights to. So once again, we're going to be changing the access rights to a specific account record. Wants to know which record's access rights we're changing. So we only want to change a single accounts record. So once again, we're going to use the filter. We're going to build a condition for ID, and we're going to point that towards our read account info element as it captured the ID of the record that launched this process. So it's only going to change that single account's access rights. You do have to be somewhat careful when you're setting up these business processes. If you don't set up your filter correctly, you might clear or set access rights over a large number of records accidentally or incorrectly. In this example, we're only going to be changing the access rights of a single account, whatever account it was that triggered this process to run. Down here at the bottom, it's going to ask us which access rights we want to remove. So I'm going to start by removing all of the access rights off of this record, as they're going to be reapplied in just a moment based on the region that was selected. You can choose to remove only specific users, employees, or specific roles. In this example, I think it makes more sense to take off all of the access rights and then reassign based on what we saw in that lookup list. So you also have the option of choosing whether the read, edit, or delete rights are all removed or just any combination of those three. Okay. And then we need to define which access rights we're going to add. So I can go ahead and hit the plus button. We're going to add rights for a specific user role. It's going to be one of those region organizational roles we defined earlier. Here it asks us to specify what that role is. So I'm going to go ahead and use this. We're going to use the process parameter once again. And this time we're going to look at our second read data element, which is reading the region lookup. And we're going to select the organizational role that we read earlier. Go ahead and save that. And again, we can define whether it's going to apply read, edit, or delete permissions. I think a pretty common request we have is to not allow anybody except for system admins to delete. So we're going to keep delete unchecked and just apply read and edit permissions. Okay. This could use a relabeling as well. We'll go ahead and call this set account security. All right. So let's go ahead and connect this. Squish this together a little bit. I zoomed in and my screen's a little cluttered. And then the last piece we'll need is that terminate end event, of course, which we can drag out here. And we'll need to connect that as well. Okay, so everything looks good. Let's go ahead and save this process. Hopefully I set it all up correctly. We'll test it here in just a second. Okay, so let me go to my other tab, which is still on the process library. If I go back to the account section, let's go ahead and find an account record. I'm going to use my own account, my technology advisors here. If we look at the access rights using the action menu, it should be set to the all employees role. Well, it has many. It's actually all employees as well as myself, because I was the one who created this record. What we should see is once I change that region lookup, it should delete all of these permissions and reapply based on the region I select. So like I said, I'm going to cross my fingers that I set that up correctly. And we'll go ahead and make a change to the region lookup here. Let's go ahead and use the central region. I go ahead and save this record and recheck those access rights. It does look like it worked correctly, so it removed all of the read, edit, and delete permissions like it was supposed to, and has assigned the read permission to the central region, the edit permission to the central region, and has explicitly denied the central region from making any deletes to this record. You'll notice it does not list system administrators under delete. Keep in mind that's actually controlled through a system setting, so even though nothing is listed under delete, as a system administrator I would still be able to potentially delete this record. Okay, so let's go ahead and change that one more time just to make sure it works correctly for a different region. Go ahead and switch that to the Western region. Go ahead and save. If we look at the access rights one more time, it should be set to the West region, which it looks like it is, which is good. If we go back to our system designer one more time, we'll check this in the process log. We should have two separate processes, one for each time we change the region, and it looks like it did complete those processes correctly. If I wanted to go back and see the execution diagram, I could. This is useful if you're ever needing to troubleshoot a process. I think a lot of times when people set these up, they can get their ID filters a little mixed up. But once again, you have to be very careful when you're building the process, especially on that change access rights element. I would certainly encourage everybody to test this on a development or a test instance if they have one available. But it did hit all of our system elements correctly. So it passed through both read data elements, it changed the account security, and then hit the terminate event, which set it to the completed status, which is correct. Okay. So let me go ahead and jump back to my slides for just one more moment. I have one last slide, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, okay? So I did just want to highlight briefly that just this week, bpm'online was recognized by Gartner. So they're actually the only challenger listed on the new 2018 Gartner Magic Quadrant for Salesforce automation. I actually included a link to where you can download that full Gartner report. This is something usually we find our customers are very interested in, so feel free to follow that link to bpm'online's main page. And you can get a free copy of the full report by just entering some of your information on one of their forms. With that said, I'll go ahead and jump to our last slide, where we'll thank you all for joining us. And like I said, I have plenty of time to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Tim. I just want to let everybody know a couple of quick wrap-up items. You'll see there next user group is going to be on September 26th. And as I mentioned at the start, the registration link for that is in that widget at the bottom of your screen. And we will also, send out reminders and have that on our website as well. In addition, the recording of this presentation today will be sent to you, and it will also be available on our Technology Advisors website and YouTube page within the next 48 hours. So keep an eye out for that. We want to make sure that you have access to this so you can reference back and get all those questions answered. But I think Tim did a really great job today of going over all the specifics. I'll give another minute or two to let any last minute questions come in. But I think we are good.
All right. Thank you, Deneen. If anybody thinks of any questions later, feel free to shoot me an email as well. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll all be looking forward to checking out that recording.
And again, just as a reminder that if you need Tim's email or if you need my email, that's another thing that you can find in those widgets as well, guys. All right, thank you, Tim, and we look forward to seeing you all in September.